The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
On the Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man," and then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back and you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I have here a deck of playing cards. These are Catholic doctrine playing cards, and each one of the cards has a Catholic doctrine on it. And the 7 of clubs, the doctrine that is presented there is the 7 capital sins, which this card lists as pride, covetousness, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth. These are called the 7 capital sins or 7 deadly sins because it is from these 7 that all the other sins flow. And one of the greatest of these, I think, is pride, the first one that is listed on the card. And pride is what today's readings are about, or its opposite anyway, humility. There's a Latin root, hum, meaning ground. From this we get humus, exhume, humble, and humility. We recall from one of the creation stories of Genesis that we were created from the earth, from dirt, from the ground. This is a rather lowly beginning for us as a species. But remembering that we were created from the hum makes us, I would hope, humble or grounded or down to earth, perhaps. And Jesus reminds us today, along with the other readings, that we are not as important as we would sometimes like to think. And if you want to go a bit further, he is saying that we are not God. One of the philosophers I studied in seminary claimed that God could not exist because if he really did exist, then no one could stand to not be him. Okay? Now I remember thinking at the time, this guy is a nut. I don't have any problem with the fact that I'm not God. But as I've gotten older, the fact of the matter is, there is something inside of us which yearns to be recognized, to be immortalized, to be thought of as more than we actually are. And that is what got Adam and Eve into trouble in the garden. The serpent tricked them into thinking that if they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then they would be gods. And if you're a god, you don't need to depend on anyone else for anything. You don't need to acknowledge dependence upon the one who really is God. And in fact, you don't need to acknowledge dependence on anyone at all. So Jesus tries to make his hearers, and us of course, look at the underlying reality of our own attitudes and behaviors. He tried to make them realize that they were only men, created by, an outside being, like everyone is. And so there was no reason to take on an attitude of superiority, vying for the most important positions at the banquets so that others would think highly of them. Toward the end of the book of Job, it says this, and this is God speaking to Job. He says, "Gird up your loins now, like a man. I will question you, and you will tell me the answers. Where were you when I founded the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its size? Do you know? Who stretched out the measuring line for it? Into what were its pedestals sunk? And who laid the cornerstone? While the morning stars sang in chorus, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? And who shut within doors the sea when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment, and thick darkness its swaddling bands? When I set limits for it, and fastened the bar up at its door, and said, Thus far shall you come, but no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stilled. Have you ever in your lifetime commanded the morning, and shown the dawn its place? For taking hold of the ends of the earth, till the wicked are shaken from its surface? We are reminded today that we are to be humble because everything that we have done and that we possess is a gift. At the most basic level, if God had not created us, we would not even be here to ask the question about our own importance. And as for any accomplishments that we have done, one has to exist before they can do anything, successful or not. Furthermore, a person gets the stuff needed to be a successful person from other people. Parents, teachers, mentors, friends, who nurtured whatever God-given talents were already there into fruition. Additionally, this person, if they are successful, must be born at the right time and in the right place in order for their particular talent to come into fruition. Let's take an example. How about Bill Gates? Most of us know him, maybe not personally, but we know about him. Let's pretend that Bill Gates would have been born in 1980 rather than when he actually was. Would he be worth the billions that he is today? Probably not, because he would have missed the chance to write the first operating system called DOS 1.0 for the first IBM PC computer. Well, how about if IBM, let's give him his real birth age. How about if IBM had gone with the author of a different operating system called CP/M, Control Program for Microcomputers? That's who they were originally going to hire to write DOS 1.0. But he dissed Mother Blue. Some representatives showed up to his house that were going to offer him the position, and he made sure he wasn't there, that he was off flying, so that IBM would think that he's a very important person. And nobody does that to Mother Blue. So they hired a Harvard dropout named Bill Gates to write that operating system. Had those set of circumstances not happened, I would submit to you, Bill's life would be different than it is now. Well, and suppose he wouldn't have dropped out of Harvard. He was smart, is smart, and he saw the future. And that computers would be part of that future. So he dropped out of Harvard to pursue those interests. But if he hadn't had the gumption to do that, what would have happened? How about if he had been born in Bangladesh rather than Seattle, where he had easy access to a computer because of his father's employment with the United States government and worked on a computer. And that's where he started getting interested. Now, there's no doubt that he worked hard, that he was smart, and he really went after it to accomplish what he did. But the fact of the matter is, if all of these other circumstances hadn't been in place, he could be like me, driving around a 1999 cheap Cherokee with 125,000 miles on it. So it begs the question, is there really such a thing as a self-made man? Unfortunately, it has become deeply embedded in our society that we are the masters of the universe, that we should answer to no one, that we have a right to do with the world as we please, no matter what effect it might have somewhere else. Why? Well, we deserve it. Our interests are more important than anyone else's. We want what we want when we want it. And Jesus speaks to us today in our culture, which seems to really no longer appreciate the virtue of humility. And he asks us to contemplate who we really are, to realize how dependent we are on God, for one, but also on each other, and to see that that is the truth. We are living in a fantasy land if we assume otherwise. He tries to show us today that pride is death to faith, because it turns the truth of who we are into a lie that poisons our most basic assumptions about what life is about. And Jesus asks us today to really think about this in our own life and to come to the Catholic conviction. Remember, man, that you are dust, and unto dust you will return.